With just a few mods, I've turned Minecraft into a very difficult and occasionally realistic experience, set sometime around the mid-20th century during an event I've colloquially dubbed the Nuclear Age. With this video, the total days spent in the mod pack is brought up to 400. The first 300 days in this mod pack were spent playing through the Industrial Revolution. If you haven't already seen that, I would highly recommend watching it before this video if you want to have context for everything that's going on. My goal for the first 100 days spent in the Nuclear Age is the not so easy task of constructing a nuclear reactor. The challenges in the mod pack include hunger, thirst, temperature, weather, zombies, pollution, more pollution, and radiation. If you want to play this mod pack for yourself, you can head on over to CurseForge using the link in the description. Big thank you to all my patrons. Your support helps a lot with YouTube's ever-fluctuating ad rates and algorithm. If you want to help support me directly, that's a great way to do so. And you get access to my private Minecraft SMP server using the mod pack featured in these videos, in addition to schematics for my various builds. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, then consider dropping a like and subscribing down below. I'm trying to get to 250,000 subscribers, and I need your help. Thanks. I might have just recently entered the Nuclear Age, but it did not mean that I didn't need to finish my house. I should have potentially built a house entirely out of lead blocks, but I don't have that much lead, and it would have looked super ugly, so I opted instead, as you saw in the last video, to go with a bunch of different bricks. Speaking of a bunch of different bricks, I kind of had to make a whole new set of building materials so that I could coat the house in a bunch of framed blocks and decocraft props and architecture craft little models to fully finish it, because the schematic from Building Gadgets did not include a single tile entity, meaning that there was a lot of work still left to do. It would be super nice if Building Gadgets included tile entities. Guys, you really have to trust me. The blood moon chance in this mod pack, it's only 5% each night. I know it doesn't feel like that, but I promise it is 5%. But when I get it literally on the first day back of recording, it kind of gets annoying. It doesn't really feel like 5%. And it just means I have to sit around underground for literally 10 minutes, just AFK or go mining or something and not work on building. It never happens. There's never blood moons when I'm mining. No, it's always when I'm above ground trying to do something that would be bad to have mobs around for. And when there's no blood moons, I'm dying of frostbite instead. Or if I'm not dying of frostbite, then there's an invasion and there's tons of evil bats that want to try to kill me. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it's kind of cringe when there's all those bats. And sometimes, you know, it's all three. Sometimes there is a blood moon on an invasion night, and there's bats, and there's also frostbite. Oh, and then I can die of pollution. That sometimes happens as well when the zombies spawn next to me and my gas mask runs out, and then it runs out multiple times. Then I can't get my stuff back without dying again. It's a whole thing, and it makes me want to rage quit. A day would come when I would rage quit the game, but it was not that day. That day, I got to make some nuclear decay generators and decay uranium into uranium-238 and make blueberry pancakes. I don't think that really goes together. I don't really need radioactive pancakes, but I definitely need some uranium-238 blocks. On day 7, I decided to make the manufactory, which can do a ton of different stuff. I made some magnets, which I used to make some solenoids, and then I was able to make the manufactory itself to the tune of a nice fireworks show. Oh no, there goes the other merchandisable bowling ball. What a shame. I needed to make the alloy furnace, which took basic plating, which meant that I had to get some graphite dust, which can only be made in the manufactory. So I did that using a bunch of my coal dust that I already had lots of, because that's what I get for my pollution filters. And that evening I made the alloy furnace and made some ferroboron alloy in it so that I can make a Geiger counter to see just how irradiated I am at any given time. It turned out that I was actually doing pretty okay at the time. Just between you and me, maybe it wasn't a super great idea making my railway go right next to a nuclear fallout biome. That might have been a bad idea in retrospect. Regardless of nuclear fallout biomes or acid rain in this circumstance, I still had a job to do, and that job was moving my coal mining excavator, because it had fully exhausted an entire coal chunk. And we wouldn't want to have any break in our coal production now, would we? I mean, what would I do if I couldn't continue polluting my entire world for 5 minutes? My silt mining excavator also ran out of its vein at about the same time that the coal one did, so I just moved that as well to a silt chunk, which happened to be pretty close to the coal chunk, which was very convenient. Speaking of pollution, I don't think I actually have enough pollution. I think I need to just capture some carbon dioxide on purpose so that I can do stuff with it. Yes, I made some carbon dioxide filters, not the filters that I already had. This is a completely different thing. And you stick it on top of blast furnaces and it collects carbon dioxide gas very slowly, which you need to use in some rubber production stuff. Also, I apologize, my recording software broke for some reason and decided to not record game audio for part of the video, which is why you're hearing nothing now, but I promise it comes back a little bit later. To avoid falling into the ever-present trap of not finishing interiors of buildings, I decided that the sooner I got to work on the interior of my house and the little building next to it, the better, so that I could have more of a chance of making it somewhat nice to live in and not just a big empty shell. I decorated a little bit of what would be my living room with a nice fireplace, and I started working on the various floors in my building. I was able to get 3 floors out of the sandy brick building, and the other part of it that's connected via the second and third floor, that's only going to have 2 floors. It's going to be like a little restaurant thing, just so I can have a nice excuse to decorate a place for my kitchen. Yes, I just teleported into wires and died. And then I just died again trying to get my stuff back. Well, only 3 fatalities on the first moving day. I guess it could have been a lot worse, you never know. This is my favorite room now in my new house, my spooky enchanting table room. It's not Halloween yet, but it's close. It's almost legal to start listening to spooky music again. The very last thing I've got to move into my new house is my entire storage system, consisting of some dozen or so chests. But hey, just like that, with the power of editing, I'm already on my very last chest that I have to move. That didn't take very long now, did it? On day 16, I had way more trouble than I should have trying to make some wires go into my house. It was just a combination of bad planning on my part and really weird hitboxes of some of the trapdoors and little ledges and stuff that I'd put down. But after a bunch of frustration and struggling, I was able to get some wires into my little room. And don't worry, I used insulated wires, so I won't kill myself every single time that I try to walk into my room, so that's always a good thing. I made the tech gun's blast furnace so that I could make obsidian steel, which I did right away. And I worked on making the tech gun's ammo press as well so that I could make bullets for my guns super easily and efficiently. Speaking of one of those guns, I made an AK-47 to replace my lame SMG, and now I am much more equipped to deal with nasty mobs. But I could always become more equipped than I am at any given time, like by making electronics, a turret, and an arc furnace. Although I don't particularly want to make the arc furnace right now. You see, the arc furnace is the only thing I can use to make advanced electronic alloys, so I have to use it. The arc furnace also requires electrodes, which are made from a special blueprint which you can only get as loot or buy from villagers, but as you can see, one of my villagers that I had captured for a long time happens to sell the arc furnace electrode blueprint, so that was nice. I got to make use of my villagers for the first time in a while. I took a bunch of my coke dust from my pulverized coal coke and stuck it in a squeezer presser thingy and turned it into HOP graphite, which I turned into HOP graphite ingots, which I got turned into arc furnace electrodes. And here I am incredibly speedily building the arc furnace. It's got to be a world record or something. And just like that, I'm able to expend vast quantities of energy to smelt a whole lot of stuff really fast. Probably more energy than I actually have at the moment, but that's not important. I only need to use just enough energy to smelt some advanced electronic alloys made from electrum, constantan, and platinum. Platinum being the hard thing to come by because it's super rare underground, and I only had a few bits of it. I also only had a few bits of redstone ore either, specifically 15 of them or 14 or whatever. Barely enough to use, especially given how fast I go through redstone, but enough for now. For now. I really wanted to make a turret, better than the flamethrower turret that I already had, so I worked on getting another little circuit thing. Basic circuit board. It's hard enough just making the basic one, let alone the processor circuit board, but I don't have to do that quite right this second. I made a bolt action rifle, which is pretty simple, and it just takes rifle rounds. Got scared by a creeper, which dropped onto my head and detonated without me even seeing it. It must have fell from my roof, which is exactly kind of what I want to prevent with my turret. But on day 21, I did set up my turret, and it proceeded to immediately start sniping a skeleton across the river. It was a very good turret, doing a great job. Keep it up. Looks like I could also use a turret on my roof as well. There are so many mobs up here and it's the middle of the day. I don't know what's happening. Too many spiders, too many creepers. The next machine that I needed to make was the chemical laboratory, which is very important for making plastic, which is used in a lot of nuclear machines. The only problem is that the chemical laboratory needs an advanced circuit board, something I haven't made yet, and it's what I need the advanced electronic alloy for. In other words, I had a lot of circuit crafting in my future. The very first thing I started doing was making some more etching acid for my chemical bath, and some more basic electronic components, which were immediately turned into some basic circuit boards, which got turned into an assembly scheme which would allow me to make advanced electronic components. Ooh! I even made an assembly scheme for advanced vacuum tubes, which are just bigger versions of normal ones. I took a brief break from circuit crafting to make a little steel catwalk between my house and my factory building. Then I began making the advanced vacuum tubes, which I turned into advanced electronic components when combined with a few other things. Then I realized that I had to double the amount of advanced electronic components I needed, because I had to make a blueprint that would allow me to make the advanced circuit boards to begin with, and that blueprint took some of the advanced electronic components, so it was a whole crazy thing. But on day 23 I finally got the chemical laboratory. It was a very happy day. I made an infinite water source and connected it to the chemical lab, and I threw some logs into it to begin making raw rubber. Not the kind of rubber that's useful for tires and other things. It's only a crafting ingredient for plastic. Because once I had that raw rubber, I stuck it back into the chemical lab with some oil and got raw plastic. Once I had that, I could turn my attention to some other things, such as finding a new vein for an excavator to mine uranium, which I actually did. I found several plain uranium veins pretty close to each other, which seems kind of unusual since the uranium veins seem a little bit rare. I even found a platinum vein, which will definitely be useful sometime in the future. But what I was really looking for was another pitch blende vein so that I could get thorium and lead and uranium. You see, the first one I had glitched out and it just deleted itself for some reason, because I have found one in the previous video, but then it ran out way too quickly. And what are the chances of this? I literally found a pitch blende vein on the very last core that I drilled before running out of power in my capacitor. I was basically ready to call it quits, and the very last one was the right vein. Of course, since I'd located a new vein for pitch blende, I still had to move the excavator over to it, which wasn't bad actually. It was fairly close to the old one, ironically. And now, since I've got uranium automated again, I feel pretty good about my setup back at home, where I am right now. And so I figured I may as well get ready to go off to the Alps and start setting up the base there. But there were a few things I had to get ready so that I could go on that journey, like make more rails, because the railway has to go into the mountain. I also had to make a few machines to take with me, mainly isotope separators, so that while I was working there, I could separate my uranium into uranium-238 and 235. I also made a few thermoelectric generators, which are a super easy portable power source. And then I hopped on my locomotive for a nice, scenic, relaxing, lag-free train ride to the Alps. Ah, but only if it had been that. It was all fun and games until halfway through the train ride when I reached about 140 kilometers per hour. And then I crashed my game because I was going too fast and I had too high of a render distance and it almost crashed my computer. So that was very entertaining. But no matter, the tunnel digging began on schedule the next day on day 29. I mean, what schedule? That's ambitious of me. The tunnel progressed deep into the mountain over the course of several days. All the while, I fed my local black hole a nice diet of excess cobblestone and dirt. But on day 32, I had to return back to my base on a much less laggy, much smoother, much more scenic train ride. That morning, when I arrived back in my train station, I experienced the most embarrassing thing I have ever done in this game. Yep, I rode my train straight into a high voltage power line because 1, I was stupid enough to put the power line over the track, and 2, I was stupid enough to not realize I had put the power line over the track, and 3, apparently the power line phases through the trains and still kills passengers, so that's not very good. The main reason I returned back to my base at all was just to get a bunch of coal and water for my locomotive, and also to see if there was some form of, like, stopper, like, buffer track thing that I could stick at the end of a rail. And I looked up some stuff online. I looked in my casting basin and I didn't really see anything, so maybe if someone in the comments knows of a way to make a good, like, stop for an end of a track so that it doesn't just go off the rail, that would be great, because I didn't find anything. I had reached the part under the mountain that I was trying to get to, so it was just time to make the small, very small train station underneath the mountain, which, first priority for me was digging a pollution vent, so that I don't create gigantic thermonuclear explosions out of pollution. Not that that actually happens, but that's what it seems like. Yeah, if you don't let the pollution out, eventually I'll be walking along and the entire station roof will just explode, and it would be awful if that happened. Definitely still didn't happen a few times. So yeah, this is the size of the station I'm going to make. It's very small by my standards, okay? And I have a really cool idea for how it's going to look. If you have ever been to the underground stations, subway stations in DC, in the United States, you'll probably have some idea what it's going to look like. I'm going to be trying to replicate that little concrete grid pattern that makes up the roof of the tunnel, because it kind of feels like when you go into those stations, you're just riding the train into a half cylinder. It's really cool. You can see there, I blew up some pollution because there's still coal that I had to mine. Then pollution, just not all of it, got out from the train. Yeah, but after tons of vein mining and lots of food eaten, I had dug out the entire station. I went up to the surface and killed some squid for some black dye, and I also grabbed a bit of ice, which I used to power my thermoelectric generators along with uranium blocks. I connected my thermoelectric generators to my isotope separator so that I could start sticking in my uranium ingots and getting uranium-238 and 235. I needed a break from the incessant digging, so I decided to go mining instead. I know that doesn't seem a lot different, but it's a big difference for me. Big difference for me, not just vein mining. I found a dungeon, which had some cool loot in it, and I found this crazy mushroom cave, and I ate a blue sprout, which made me turn into a blueberry. That's what it says. It's just called blueberry. That's kind of cool, I guess. And then I went back home on my train so that I could dump off all the ore that I'd found and restock on some supplies. As you can see, I've got a pretty nice haul of stuff, probably the most valuable there being redstone. Yes, more valuable at this moment than draconium ore. And the supplies that I needed back at my base actually were mostly building supplies because I needed to actually decorate my train station. So I started making a lot of normal concrete, which then I turned into reinforced tech guns concrete, which has the texture and color that I'm looking for the floor of my train station. That's kind of hard to say. I made an extra isotope separator so that I could separate the stuff twice as quickly, and I made a few speed and energy upgrades to take with me. I also took a bit more power generation capabilities with me. I tore down my old boiler, figured I'd bring that, might need it, you never know. I also grabbed a few portable generators, and I built a big fluid tank to hold lots and lots of liquid concrete, so that I can stock up large amounts of it, even when I'm not using it. I made a few fancy electric lights, and the last thing I worked on making was some hydraulic platforms, which were rather difficult because they took advanced electric motor thingies, which are a big pain to make. The platforms themselves, though, should be super cool since they're basically just elevators. I got straight to work on building the floor and walls, not very bright, but very early on day 46. Since a large amount of my work remaining on the station involves the ceiling, I had the brilliant idea to make a jetpack. So I had to take a quick trip back to my base and craft that up. I was hoping that it would allow me to hover, or at the very least, not have to build crazy amounts of scaffolding to reach the ceiling. Luckily, the Tech Gun's jetpack is not particularly difficult to make, and the fuel is just gasoline loaded into fuel tanks. And I already had a lot of the fuel tanks anyways from some structures I'd found that had them as loot. So I was super set on fuel for it, but I couldn't figure out how to hover with it, which was a little disappointing. Maybe there's a way that you can do it and I just couldn't figure it out, but it still was a whole lot better than nothing. And by nothing, I mean scaffolding. It's turned out pretty much how I was hoping it would look, although I don't exactly have enough concrete to finish all of it. I kind of ran out after finishing one half of it, so I had to go back to my base to refill on my concrete. I discovered that my iron mining excavator had run out of its ore vein, along with pretty much all of the other ones this video apparently. But I was lazy, so I decided to put off moving it, and instead I made a combat helmet. Not because it's actually better armor for armor points, and it kind of looks silly with the rest of my armor, especially with the sunglasses. But the good thing about it is that it will increase my speed. Just passively I get a speed buff when I wear it, so that's the main reason I wanted to have it. Another reason I came back is there was another machine that I needed to make. The crafting recipe for the machine was a little bit tricky. It needed this little chemical dispenser robot thing, and I guess you just stick it in some plates, form it into a machine, and it kind of just works. And by working, I mean it serves a very important function where you can stick basically any block that you want into it plus some cobblestone, and it'll paint that cobblestone with the texture of the other block that you put into it. Meaning that if I wanted to build with a lot of steel blocks, and I didn't want to actually use steel blocks, I could just take cobblestone, stick it into the painting machine, and paint it with these steel block textures so that I get to build with cobblestone that looks like steel blocks. Pretty genius, if I do say so myself. Oh, and before anyone asks in the comments, that capacitor came from the reward for making the machine to begin with in the quest book. I wouldn't want to forget to feed my pet black hole its daily ration of diamonds. Now would I? That'd be a real shame. I feel really bad for that. I finally got around to putting some vents in the ceiling to let the pollution out the correct way, instead of just a hole in the ceiling that goes to the outside. It's a little bit more eloquent now. It didn't take me very long to fully finish off the station, and I guess with that, my friends, my train station is all done. Or would it be called a subway station? Does it depend on what kind of station it is, like if it's underground, or does it depend on the type of train slash vehicle that goes into it? I don't actually know. I'm sure someone in the comments knows though. You see, now that the station is done, call it whatever type you will, the real project begins. The project of having to make a nuclear facility to begin creating fancy isotopes for lots of different things. Hey, and the great thing is, if anything goes wrong at my nuclear facility, then it won't matter too much because I'll be super far from my base. I won't create a gigantic nuclear radiation disaster right next to my house. That would be a real shame now, wouldn't it? There's already a nuclear fallout biome close by. I don't need more radiation. I got a chance to try out my hydraulic platform elevators only to be immediately disappointed because I learned that they couldn't go very far. They could only go up and down about 10 blocks. And since my elevator shaft was about 50 blocks or more, it was pretty darn tall. I didn't really feel like making half a dozen different elevator segments inside one elevator shaft, so I kind of scrapped that idea. I didn't even see anything in the configs that would allow me to make it go farther. I was really hoping I could make it just go 100 blocks or something. Could always be worse though. I have this super awesome view from the cliffside. It didn't really surprise me when a storm showed up super quickly, since the mountains are really close to the ocean and that's where storms form anyways, but I had brought with me a ton of supplies, pretty much a little bit of everything, so it wasn't any problem making a weather deflector. I hooked up a couple of portable generators that I brought with me to try to make power more quickly, I guess, and easily. And they already had some like fluids and stuff on the inside that they could burn, but it used it super fast and it guzzled the gasoline that I brought with me, so it ended up not being very viable because I just ran out of fuel after about a minute and a half. I did find this cool dungeon structure though right underneath one of my hallways, which had a bunch of zombies and skeletons in it. The loot was just normal dungeon loot and not terribly exciting, unfortunately. I think the most interesting stuff that I got out of it was some phoenix dust. Just for fun though, I did retrieve the mob spawners and dump them up in my soon-to-be reactor room. The phoenix dust that I collected reminded me that I already had a lot of it back in my base. So I decided to return home and make a phoenix egg. But I wasn't quite sure what to do with the phoenix egg. I didn't initially know if you had to like put it in the egg incubator or something, but I made the bird notebook thing that has information on all the different kind of birds, including the phoenix. Eventually I realized that you could just put the phoenix egg straight onto the ground, so I decided to move it somewhere safe away from the pollution, so that when it hatched it wouldn't immediately die. The next morning I looked at the crafting recipes for some machines that I needed to make, including the nuclear reactor fission controller, and I decided that farming would be a lot easier and simpler than trying to make a nuclear fission controller. I even got to make a nice holiday cake, even though it's definitely not Christmas. I wish. Summer's almost over, thank goodness. One of these days I'd have to start though, so it may as well be this day. And to start I'd have to make the 5x5 advanced crafting table thingy, which takes 2 of the tier 1 crafting tables, advanced something, I'm not sure what it's called, basic crafting table? Yeah. It takes 2 of those, so that's a lot of black iron, and black iron takes thorium and titanium, and so that's a lot of thorium. But I had a lot of the materials saved up from my excavator, so it wasn't any big deal making the basic crafting tables. The only problem is I definitely didn't leave the uranium-235 all the way back at the mountain, and I definitely didn't have to race over there and grab it and then run back so that I could just make the table. Oh, but the fun's not over yet. No, because I was just making the ability to be able to craft the fission controller. I didn't even craft the fission controller or start on that yet. Okay, well there, now I've started on it. I'm basically almost done. Right there, you can see that's basically the entire thing. I noticed on day 67 my phoenix had hatched and was actually doing okay. It hadn't died yet, but I figured it'd be a good idea to make an enclosure for it far away. So I got some stuff out of my inventory, got a name tag, and named it the one acceptable thing to name a phoenix, if you've read a certain series. I moved it about 100 blocks away from the pollution over to the tree line, where I set up a nice little glass enclosure for it, and I gave it its own weather deflector, and I gave it its own little fire flower from the nether, which I did confirm it did not take damage from. Probably it was nice for it. But once my phoenix was all taken care of, it was back to the very fun job of crafting a fission controller, which took a lot of different materials. It took some magnesium diboride solenoids. Probably mispronounced that, but you never know. Took a lot of advanced plates, took a lot of plastic for all of that stuff, took some advanced electronic alloy plates, and the worst of all, takes a processor circuit board, which I had not made before. And if you thought that the advanced circuit board was hard to make, well, the processor one is that, but like 4 times harder. So the processor takes a ton of transistors, and the transistors take a lot of black dye, some other things, and a ton of silicon wafers. Oh, and of course it also takes a lot of advanced electronic alloy, therefore lots of platinum. Lots of platinum that I barely managed to scrape together. Eventually I did get everything I needed to make 2 stacks of transistors, because I needed to make 4 processors, like the items themselves, because 2 of them needed to be used in a blueprint to make the processor circuit boards, and the other 2 were to make the actual processor circuit board item. So yeah, it was a whole crazy thing. The best part of it is it takes forever for that precision assembler to craft a transistor 64 times, which is what it has to do. This meant I had a lot of free time on my hands where I was just waiting for that, so I decided to be useful and try to set up a steam turbine and all the fun things that go with that, to try to get more power and transition away from the diesel generators. Getting the materials for the steam turbine wasn't that difficult because I already had tons of stuff on hand. I just had to craft it together into the various engineering blocks. And I set it all up pretty easily on day 74, only to realize that I had forgotten to make the boiler. I had even gathered the materials for the boiler, but I just completely forgot to set it up. I was somehow going to connect a distiller straight to a steam turbine. That definitely makes sense. Eventually, of course, I did remember the boiler, and I tried to set it up. I built it the wrong way the first time and had to flip it 180 degrees, so that was pretty cool. And then my mask ran out. I almost died of pollution. That was pretty neat. And on day 75, I got the boiler set up the right way, and I got the steam output connected to the steam turbine, and it seemed great. You know, the steam turbine, it was spinning up, it was looking good, it was making electricity, and then it spun down and stopped working because apparently one boiler is not enough steam anymore for some reason. Maybe it automatically increased the amount of steam consumed because I've increased the power output. That might be it. But it meant I had to make a second boiler. It's probably not even using less diesel now than 2 diesel generators were. I don't really know what the diesel consumption rate is on those boilers versus the generators. But 2 boilers were able to do the trick, and at the very end of day 75, I got the steam turbine finally spinning up to max speed. I decided it'd probably be a good idea to make a bunch of pollution filters, like the items to put in the filter blocks themselves, because the pollution cloud over my diesel generators and those coke ovens, it's getting quite large and alarming, so it seemed like it might be a good idea to try to do something about it. I also swapped out the filters in the smokestack in my main factory building as well, because that creates a sizable amount of pollution. Of course, I had to expand my ventilation system to capture pollution from the boilers now as well. I finally got around to moving my iron mining excavator, but then there was an invasion, and of course it was the worst invasion with the illagers, and then the illusioners give me blindness, and it's a whole thing. But I did feel pretty cool flying through the sky, not being able to see anything but sniping vexes with my railgun. That was kind of epic. And apparently if you sit really, really far away and snipe the illusioner, it doesn't give you blindness, which is exactly what I did. I moved my excavator to another predominantly iron vein, but it also was about 20 or 30% gold, which was super nice because I'm always short on gold. It was at that point that I took a look at the assembly scheme for the processor item, and I realized that it needed an advanced radio, which takes a normal radio, and it takes another advanced circuit, like the thing that I already had to make for that laboratory a long time ago. So I had to go through a whole lot of stuff again. At least all my transistors were done by that point, so I had those ready. And I was free to use my assembling machine to make that other advanced circuit board. Remember how I said I was short on redstone a while ago? Well, now I'm essentially out of redstone. I have 4 pieces of redstone, and I need a lot of redstone for the circuits that I have to make. So I decided that instead of going mining, I would just look for a cinnabar vein. A vein that the excavator can mine that will provide me with infinite redstone. Infinite as long as the vein lasts. So not infinite, but you get the idea. I spent a long time looking for the cinnabar vein. I think it's the only vein that I had yet to find. But eventually I found it on my lake, and since it was winter, it was fairly convenient to build an excavator and plop it down onto the ice, because that totally makes sense. It can just dig through the water. Yeah, and those last 4 pieces of redstone got used to make the 4 pistons I needed to make the exactly 4 heavy engineering blocks I needed to make my excavator. So somehow it worked out perfectly. On day 81, I went and assembled the excavator, and it was pretty easy to connect it up to my already existing high voltage power lines that were in the area. So I was able to finally start getting infinite redstone. I also, as a bonus, get ruby ore from it and sulfur ore. Not that I really need any more sulfur than I already have. There's already enough of it in the sky, but it's still kind of cool. And of course, I have plenty of redstone to make all of the electronic components that I need now. The next morning, I made my advanced radio so that I could finally make the assembly scheme that I needed to make processors. And now I think it's safe to say that I'd ever want to make another processor or circuit ever again. Not by hand. If I have to do a lot more of it, I'm probably going to automate it. in the next video, or whenever I could get around to it. But there was one last thing that the game did to annoy me. For some reason, it seems to take way more energy to craft those processor items, meaning that it ran really slowly because it wasn't getting enough energy all of a sudden. And it wouldn't be long before everything didn't get enough energy because I finally exhausted my really big oil vein that I found a few videos ago. Conveniently, the next biggest oil vein that I'd found was literally in one chunk away. It was adjacent. So I only had to move the pump jacks a couple blocks. It wasn't that big of a deal. At long last, I got my first 2 processor items, half of what I needed in total, and I was able to use them to make the blueprint for the processor circuit boards. The processor circuit board alone is extremely expensive, and for some reason, it also seems to use way more energy than normal, this time in the chemical bath trying to etch it. By the time both of the processor items were done, the circuit board itself was only about 50% done being etched, and the animation just kept playing over and over again. It was kind of funny. Lo and behold, my steam turbine had stopped running along with all of my other power generation because, once again, my tanks of diesel and lubricant and gasoline got screwed up because apparently it had drained too much of it during the time that the pump jacks had run out of oil. I've had this problem before where the fluids get messed up in the tanks and then the wrong outputs go to the wrong things and it's a whole nightmare. But I was able to solve it this time just by remembering that fluid routers exist. In other words, blocks that allow me to force fluids to go in certain directions and into certain tanks. The one nice thing about having to fix my power generation for the 10th time is that while I was doing that, my processor circuit board had finally finished etching and I was able to use it along with my processor items to make the processor circuit board, the completed thing. At last, after days of effort and so much trouble, I was able to make the fission controller for a nuclear reactor. The hardest part of one, now done. Ah, the perfect way to celebrate falling into high voltage power lines and rage quitting the game. The whole reason I was over there and died to begin with is because I was still trying to fix some of my power generation stuff. I thought it had been fixed and then I realized it still wasn't. So that's part of why I rage quit, because I was already really mad. Finally though, on day 85, everything was working as it was supposed to once again, and I was able to move on with my life after only several fatalities. For some strange reason, I was completely out of experience. I can't imagine why that may have been. But it wasn't that hard to find some zombie spawners and make a little quasi-zombie farm. After which I got right to making some graphite blocks for the reactor. I did notice though there was a lot of pollution building up in my little machine room in my house, so I decided to let it out before my entire house blew up. I don't want to deal with that. I don't need any more difficulty. I've already died a ton of times because of pollution. Can't forget about reactor coolers though. Those are super important unless I want my reactor to turn into corium immediately, which I don't really want that. Not quite yet anyways. Since there's so many different types of coolers and I had no idea what configuration I'd be making, I just decided to bring some empty frames with me and also a bunch of materials to make coolers because I figured I'd just sort it out once I got there. My ultimate goal is to get a 7x7x5 reactor, but for the time being I only had enough for a 5x5x3 reactor. Still pretty big, but nowhere near as big as my eventual goal. I know there's websites and everything that allow you to create crazy plans for the different reactor setups and cooling and everything, but just for now I wanted to just kind of mess around with it and try to experiment with stuff on my own. Maybe one of these days I'll make one of the super efficient designs, but half of the fun for me is just figuring it out on my own. Eventually I got to the point where I could get over 2,000 RF per tick just from burning TBU fuel, which is the super basic thorium derived fuel, so that was pretty great, if I'm not gonna lie. Once I had the reactor just burning fuel and creating electricity to power my couple machines, I turned my attentions to actually decorating the reactor room, which is something I really want to do before the video ends. There's just one thing that I need and I have time for to do and build before the video ends. I need a lot of glass to fill in the front of my nuclear reactor room. Unfortunately, I won't be able to fully finish it in this video, but I can at least get it looking kind of cool and mostly finished from the outside. I opted to go with panzer glass because it looks cool and it's super strong. The only problem is it takes diamonds and steel, but actually that's not a problem. It'd be a problem if I didn't have tons and tons of both of those. I wasn't quite sure how much I need, so I made 8 stacks and I brought the materials to make another 8 stacks with me just in case, because I really didn't want to run out and have to go back again on the 100th day. And just like that, the windows are all filled in, and you might be able to tell that I am leaving room and setting up space for another one of these structures, I guess, off of the corner of this one that I just made, where I can eventually put another nuclear reactor if I want. I will say though, the view is pretty amazing from this window. That's part of the reason I wanted to make it all glass, just so we could see the valley out below and the night sky and everything. But regrettably, that's all we've got time for part 1 of the nuclear age. If you guys are excited for the series and want me to continue on with my nuclear facility and work towards the eventual atomic bomb, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe down below. But that's all for this video. Thanks for watching everyone. Take care. See ya.